We've got a guest coming on. In fact, he's going to be with us right now. He's a photographer, Jim Lee, and Jim has brought out his autobiography, Life in Black and White, which we're going to talk to you, Jim, about in a moment.
Hi, Jim.
You've taken some incredibly powerful pictures over the years, most of those fashion photography. But when, I don't know if you've seen this picture today, it's been hard to avoid it, but in terms of the power of an image, it doesn't get more dramatic than what is on the front page of most of the papers today.
No, it certainly doesn't, and it's extremely alarming. And having lost a child myself, I feel very much for the family who've lost this child. But I mean, it is. I think it's right to publish it and to show it to the world to make us aware that this is happening, both from a political point of view and also from a personal point of view. So, I do have quite a strong feeling about that, and I wouldn't say that this was one stage too far in The Independent. I think it's the right thing to have done.
Can I ask you, as the man behind the lens, if you were to see something like this, what sort of moral judgment and moral argument goes through your own head about showing that image to the world and I suppose the journalistic intent to make sure that people know about it, but also the moral questions and the ethical questions that might come to you all at the same time?
Well, the difficulty is with me is that I used to create pictures with content in it. I would never do something quite as ghastly as this, but I would create photographs in order to put, comment in them and to make some statement when I'm photographing. But
if you're in that position, I know that your work is slightly different to this. Well, very different to this. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if I was in this position, would I photograph like this, or would I do it differently? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, I suppose the moral questions that we all ask ourselves. Yeah. Would you think twice about taking the picture?
I think I would. It's such a personal tragedy, and I suppose I would find it very difficult to really do that photograph. But having said it, having seen it, and having seen what it's doing to people and making awareness of what's gone wrong, I think it's important to do, and therefore I think the photographer, who's obviously, it's his job to do this photographic kind of story, that he's done it very well. But I say well, I mean, he's done it, to show the disaster, but...
Well, it's like war photography, isn't it, in some ways?
Yeah, it is. It's brave to do it, and I think one has to have people who are prepared to do this in order to make these things aware to people in the world.
Well, Jim, we're very pleased that you're on the programme to talk about us, and thank you to talk to us about this as well as your book, and I appreciate you being so candid about it. So let's talk about Life in Black and White. This is recounting your adventures when you emigrated to Australia at the age of 17 with dreams of becoming a cowboy. How did that cowboy dream work out?
Well, it's a very long story, and the only way to really know it is to read the book. I'm not trying to promote the book, but, it's an obvious thing to say. I'm not sure where you want me to actually start on this, but can you just... being a cowboy, let's say, in Australia was a dream I had because I basically was academically unable to cope with what was in front of me, and my father had always wanted me to, follow in his footsteps and go through Eton, Cambridge and on into his business. But I wasn't capable. So I drifted off and looked out the window in the classrooms and dreamed about other things and ended up, thinking this would be more fun than wearing a bowler hat and taking a briefcase up to London.
And it certainly was. And the journey that you took in Australia is fascinating. Well, Jim, we were just talking about your big road trips, to call it that, I guess, across Australia with an Aborigine man that you met. Tell us about him and what happened.
Well, he was a way of me discovering how I could be the cowboy that I had the dream of, because I just knew that if I, was to buy myself a saddle and take a hitch out into the bush, then this might be a way of, me being a ranchman or some sort of cowboy in Australia. And I would have gone to America, but they wouldn't have me. I was too young, so that's really where cowboys are. So I was doing the next second best thing by doing it in Australia. So I met this Aboriginal at a truck yard wanting a ride to go across the Nullarbor Plain in the south between Adelaide and Perth, and found this Aboriginal with his, my big truck with several trailers in the back. And I said, look, can I have a ride, and he said, sure. He said, what's with the saddle, boy? What's this, what do you got a saddle for? And I said, well, I want to go out in the bush and, and be a stockman and be a rancher and enjoy life like a cowboy. And he said, well, okay, haven't you come to the wrong country for that? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm here now. So, can you give me a lift? And he said, "Sure, go and get yourself some tucker from the shop there and a few bottles of water, and we'll carry on out." So that's what I did.
So from the world of horses and Stetsons, how did you end up behind a camera?
Well, I always wanted to do something visual because I wasn't really eligible and capable of doing anything academic. I mean, it's not that I'm an idiot or an academic dunce, but I'm not able to do something at a desk.
You
You've
have
got dyslexia and dyspraxia as well, don't you?
Dyslexia and a little bit of dyspraxia, which is not helpful. And the combination of two makes life interesting at times. But anyway, so doing something other than something academic was my journey. So photography, I mean, I would rather have painted, but I tried and had such a heavy hand, it wasn't working. So I then thought about photography, and I thought about actually wanting to make films. Was my big dream. So that's what photography was. Just one stage before directing films, because I thought that's probably a way in. There were no schools to be a director in film in those days.
And you've had the best part of 50 years taking pictures. I mean, can you remember the first one you took? And what was it particularly that made you think, I would love to do this as a job, as a profession?
I mean, partly it was because I wasn't qualified for anything else, really. So I mean, that was one of the reasons. But also, it was fun, taking pictures. And when I was in Australia, the opportunity came up because I needed to find a room to stay. And this ad in the paper said, look, if you can have a room for free if you're prepared to do some printing for me at night, some printing photographs, because the guy was the photographer in the flat. Or else you have to pay rent, and you just pay rent and you have the room. So I thought, well, the opportunity there of not having to pay for rent, but to learn to take to print pictures was great. So that was my first kickoff. That was where it got me first interested.
You've talked about shooting bands like the Rolling Stones, the Beatles and the Who. In Australia, you say, I'd already done the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Now I shot the Who, the Kinks, the Animals, the Hollies and Donovan. But you found this kind of work most unrewarding. Why?
Well, because I was always interested in telling stories. So in other words, because I wanted to film and make movies, really. Mm-hmm. Doing photography was like a stage before, as I mentioned. I didn't want to just photograph people sitting there stoned in the corner, sort of playing an instrument. It didn't really make any sense to my photographic imagery or the idea of what I wanted to do with photographs. So I didn't want to do landscapes. I wanted to sort of tell stories and get ready for, directing people to make movies. So I did photograph those bands in my own way, but sadly and not sadly...
you lost them all.
Yeah, I lost them all, exactly, I was going to say. And in a flood, and so I don't have any. I have a few prints left over, but very few. But I'm not sad about it because it's not a world that I really wanted to remain part of, particularly, or not work in anyway.
But given how collectible your work has become, Jim, and how much people are loving your work now as much as they did at the time, maybe even more, couldn't you have had another whole book out of that?
Yeah, I could, and I could have made probably quite a lot of money out of it too. But hey, money's not everything. Money is as long as it pays for a decent meal and a holiday, and you're feeling healthy and fit, and you're getting through life, that's fine. I'm not interested in making even more money from selling things or just working like an idiot just to sort of accumulate money. I'm not really driven by money.
We have the pleasure of talking to you after the news as well at past, I hope, for a little while. So there's lots of things that we want to chat to you about. But to talk just a moment about the permanent display of your work at the V&A, how did that come about? And is there part of that permanent exhibition, that you're particularly proud of?
Yes, in a way I am. The one picture, I suppose, which got me back to thinking that my early photography had any value in the world of today, which, of which there was 25, 30 years between when I last photographed, because I then went off to direct and, commercials and a movie and so on. And then eventually, 25 years on, I discovered a little picture, which was Ozzie Clarke Aeroplane, which I shot in 1969, which was in a V&A brochure, sort of, not brochure, but a magazine of which I was a friend of. And I saw this picture one night. I thought, actually, I recognise that picture. I'm not sure where from, but it's something very familiar to me. And I went to bed that night and woke up at 4 a.m. thinking, I shot that picture. Now, I wonder where it is. They're not giving me a credit for it.
Really?
So it's for an Ozzy Clark exhibition. So I then rang up. Well, I went down to the garage and dug it out at 4 a.m. Rang up the V&A the next day and said, "Look, did you know I took that picture?" And they said, "Oh my God, we've been looking for the guy who owns this, and have you got any others?"
Really?
You know? I then gave them, several more, and they exhibit them for a year, and then they began to collect my work, and they now have 15 pieces in their permanent archive, which I'm very flattered with, and I'm very glad they're there.
Just to describe that one, it is of a model flying towards herself in a mirror, with the dress going out behind?
That's right. It's a double image. Yeah, it's the two girls. It's one girl, but flipped and printed both ways, and it looks like they're flying into each other. So it's like a sort of,
And that's where, Jim, you sort of made a difference from those other sort of fashion photographers who were around at the time, because you've always wanted to, you'd much rather film somebody in a nice dress with a machine gun rather than a handbag. Or there's another famous one, isn't there, of a model walking away from a plane crash, and she's unscathed and dressed beautifully. Is it the juxtaposition of those images you find that works well?
I mean, I just like to lay interest. If I look at a picture, I want to look at it and look at it and look at it and look at it and really get into it and think, well, what's it trying to tell me, and sort of be excited or interested about it. And if I want to look at it again another day, I just want to think about it. So I always try and lay some ambiguity in my pictures. So the one picture which I absolutely, in a way represents what I think is my best picture. It was shot in 1969. It was a very good year for me. It's my very early beginnings, but was a Vietnam soldier, or rather American GI in Vietnam, who was ostensibly wrestling with a girl wearing a lovely peasant dress in multicolour. And, you don't know what's going on. You think he's got a gun, or rather he's got a pistol in his hand, and he's holding her in a particular way, and it's very voluptuous, and she's smiling and looking very sexy. And you kind of don't know whether, she's being raped or whether she's egging him on or what the situation is. And that kind of thing, to me, I find exciting, because then when you look at the picture, you think, well, what is going on? And every day you look at it, you can think differently. So. And
I suppose that's when you've hit the jackpot, when you look at a picture and the person who's watching what you've taken thinks about the dress, about the people in the picture, and about what's happening in the picture. Then you've got all three things going on at once.
But I have to say I was a terrible fashion photographer. That's really why I didn't do well at the time. But it's the pictures later that have caught up with me, because they had something in them, the actual photographs. But I mean, in that particular case, the dress looked good, but normally I would have people...
You don't care about the dress?
No, I couldn't give a damn about them, actually. I never did, but don't tell them.
Don't quote me.
No, really.
You were also really interested in making these women, in these models, in these photographs, the heroines of their own story a lot of the time. Yeah,
I know, and this is something which I've often and always really wanted to empower women in my photographs. And I don't know what it is. It sort of stuck with me from the beginning, and I'm not sure why, but it's got something to do with the fact that I felt that, these aren't just clothes horses, that women who just, put these things on to sell gear. They actually are people. And I wanted to make that clear. And also I wanted to make sure that people knew that they weren't the ones that, should be in any way dominated by the male guys of the world or the way that things are. So I always used to give them a more priority position in my photographs, or empower them in some sort of way, which I think actually was something that I'm glad I did. And it sort of kind of shows with most of the work I do.
Jim, it's good to talk to you. I'm really glad that you're going to stay with us.
Jim Lee is still with us. Jim, it's an interesting, her assessment of why she took that picture, talking about she could do nothing for the child in that situation, but she felt she needed to have and needed to take the opportunity to make sure that child's voice was heard.
Well, I think what's interesting, actually, and I hadn't realised either, I hadn't seen the credits, is it was taken by a woman. Having just talked about empowering women, I'm glad to see that women, have got the courage and guts to do this as one believes and perceives that men do. So in that respect, good on her.
And you mentioned right at the top when we were talking about this young baby boy lying on the beach in Turkey that you yourself had lost your son. Was he 13 when he was killed? Was that right?
Yeah, he was 13. Yeah. Absolutely.
Do you? This is going to sound like a stupid question now, but do you still think about that every day?
Every day.
Will you ever come to terms with that?
I mean, you do come to terms with it because you have to, or else you crumble under the dreadfulness of it. So you do, but you do kind of. And this may sound rather commercial, but you do fly in a high fly club, if you know what I mean. Thereafter, I'm not trying to make fun of it. You are in a different kind of strata in life. You can never longer be the same as you were before it. And people that you know who've been there too, there is an affinity with them. But that's probably not what you're asking.
No, that's so interesting, though. How are you on? Are you almost impervious to any real anguish after that?
Well, no, because I have 4 more children that I had 4 years after I lost my first child, and I didn't want to have children because I was too terrified of losing them again. But I did, and I'm very glad to have them, and I adore them. So that's wonderful. But I live in the same fear as I did before. Probably not in the same manner. I mean, I could be more fearful for it, but at the same time, I feel, as I'm experienced enough to know how to deal with it, in an awful, ghastly way, I'd have to do it again, and therefore I would be experienced to know how to deal with it a second time. So you do get certain strengths from, actually having to deal with these things. And so anybody who's lost a child, I'm sure, will tell you when they come through it, if they do come through it, then they'll have a kind of strength to deal with life in another way.
Your son died in a car accident, is that right, Jim?
Yeah, he did, yeah.
In terms of dealing with that with the children that come later in life, then, did you become an incredibly overprotective parent? Was it really hard to guard against that?
No, I didn't want to mar my new family with what I had from the past, so I kept it very much to myself. And actually, in a way, it was an earlier experience in my life. There were 4 years before the new child, and because the children grow up, and one's 10 years down the line before you know it, and the children are growing up. So I had things like a Range Rover to put them in to make sure if anything happened again, because a Range Rover is what killed my son. We were in a smaller car, my first wife, and so I did that kind of thing to protect my children.
Yeah.
But other than that, I tried to live an ordinary life and let life just go on from that point forward.
You're listening to Jim Lee, the photographer, on 5 Live. We're with you until 4 o'clock this afternoon. Jim, there are so many little pockets of your life that I want to talk to you about. We haven't mentioned yet that your dad was in the Secret Service. We haven't mentioned yet that you nearly died on 3 occasions. So I want to make sure we talk about those before we let you go. Can we start with your dad being in MI5?
Sure, what do you want to know?
Well, how did you find out?
Yeah, and what did you know about the life that he lived?
Well, I didn't, and this is the thing, until I found out and prodded him. I mean, basically, I lived life up right through my Australian experiences till I came back to England. And then one day my grandmother, who I adored, my mother's, my maternal grandmother, said to me, would you take me to Russia because I want to go and see all the art? And, of course, I'd love to see art as well because I'm an artist and I wanted to go with her and I adored her anyway. So we applied to go to Russia, and that weekend after I'd applied, I went down to my family, as one does, to see them at the weekend, my mother and father. And my father chirped up over lunch. He said, now, son, you can't go to Russia. And I said, well, what do you mean I can't go to Russia? How do you know I'm going? I haven't told you yet. So he said, well, you can't do it. It's not possible. It's not safe. And I said, well, what do you mean it's not safe? How do you know? I mean, of course, it's not safe in terms of, for communists and so on, but I mean, I'm going on a guided tour with, people from Thompson's Holiday or whatever. It can't be a problem. He said, no, but you can't go. That's the end of it. And I said, well, hang on a second. This is ridiculous. I need to know what all this is about. I said, there's so many little dark areas in our relationship. I don't know, what it is you do. I can only think of 2 things. Either you run a brothel or you're a spy. But, and he said, well, actually, it's the latter. And he looked at me and smiled. And I said, what does that mean, latter? Is it first or second? He said, no. So, yeah. So he then told me that he worked in the MI5. And I just sat back and looked at him. I thought, God, now I understand half of what's gone on. And it took me a further 20 years. I was only 20 when I found out, to really look back and pan through my life to see what effect all that had meant in my life. Yes. Because obviously I'd lived with this man who had lived about a secret to me anyway, at least. And,
what on earth is that like? I mean, were you angry? Were you proud of him? Were you?
No, I was extremely proud of him, and I in a funny kind of way, and yet I was sort of under his thumb in many ways because he was academically clever. He wanted me to join him in the MI5. I mean, the whole idea was to go to Eton, Cambridge, on the MI5, where everybody did do. In those days, that's where they got their recruits from, from Eton, Cambridge, and MI5. I mean, it's not like that now, but that was the main thrust of where they came from. And it's a family business, it's a very self-contained, internalized kind of world. And so, that's, but I couldn't cope with all that. And as I told you earlier, but it was very exciting to know. At the same time, he said, "No, you mustn't tell anybody about it." And I said, "Well, Look, I'm not a spy myself. I can't keep a secret. You know, I mean, he said, you must not. He said, you absolutely must not. I'm still, actively working there. So I've told you this. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll take you to a film. It's called The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. And that will show you, what kind of work I do, because I inquired what he actually did. And he took me to it. And I sat there actually riveted at this movie, watching Richard Burton and so on. And I just sat there like a little 12-year-old beside him in the cinema, sort of almost shaking and sweating, watching this film, thinking, this is what my dad does. This is ridiculous.
And a real spy, in that kind of sense of the word of the time as well, the romantic image nearly that we have of that.
Well, certainly the period, but my father actually wasn't a spy, I should add. He worked at the MI5. He worked in the nerve centre. He was DG's PA on a couple of occasions, right through the war, actually, World War II, and also later, in the time of Hollis, when there was the big kind of communist era.
Yes.
And, he was... he did a lot of interrogating, and actually I can see and sense how good he was when I think about my early childhood. I used to get
Did you really do that?
Well, I know, but I used to feel like I was being interrogated or sort of, talked out. Why aren't I doing better at my schoolwork and so on?
It's probably quite a helpful parental skill, that, the old interrogation technique.
I wanted to talk to you a bit about Anna Wintour pre-Vogue, Jim, and that incredible... how should I describe it? Well, it was a photo shoot that you did with beautiful fresh-faced models and guys that had been sitting up all night smoking and drinking in a gym and then put into a boxing ring together. Describe how that photograph came about. What was that night like?
It was Anna Wintour in the days... I first worked with her as an assistant to the fashion editors at Harper's in London, and we kind of did quite a lot of work together. I worked with her because I loved her style and she had a really good eye. She was about 21, I think, in those days, and I wasn't much older, I was sort of 25 or something. Anyway, and we did lots of lovely work. And then she wanted the job of getting on to Vogue, and she kind of wanted, she wanted that job as a senior editor, fashion editor, and they didn't give it to her, so she went, poof, I'm off, so she went off to New York, and I kind of felt a slight vacuum, and I was sort of more or less done here. I'd done everything I could for photography here, so I jumped on a plane too, and not at the same time, but more or less the same kind of period, and went off to New York, and we reconvened. Anyway, that boxing thing was just, by that stage I was getting so near to making films in my heart. I wanted to really break away from taking photographs and make films. So I conjured up this sort of situation where I thought a fashion shoot would really be cool, which would be in contrast to the background, so that the clothes stood out. So I went and chatted the idea with Anna. She was working on a magazine called Viva in those days, long before she worked for Vogue, going between Harper's, let's say, and her eventual job at Vogue. Anyway, so we discussed this idea, and she thought it was a great idea. So I went down and I went to a boxing sparring gym, actually, and got some boxers and got a bunch of guys and put them in the boxing ring and said, now listen, I want you to just stay here. I want you to, drink all night. Here's an open tab. You smoke, do what you like. Make the place really great. And we'll come out tomorrow morning. We expect to have a nice seedy environment. And we'll pop these young, fresh girls in front of it. And you'll see that lovely contrast between your beautiful dresses and these beautiful girls and this really kind of seedy background, which then I shot a series of these pictures, which were just like, in a way, different parts, if you like, of a film. So if you look at the first, the second and third, you can sort of knit them together and say, this is what happened. The first they were fighting, then they knocked him down, then there was a win. So you got that kind of feeling of the three
I love them.
Images.
It's great to hear the story behind the picture. I always enjoy hearing that. And I don't think we've ever had a guest on, Jim, where I've had to read them their own obituary, which is in your book. It is a sham obituary, but I'll read you the first bit of it. Jim Lee, 1945 to 2007. Jim died at 13:47 on the 28th of December 2007 in a remote village called Vinstra in a blizzard 4 hours north of Oslo. Thankfully, that's not true, but you have been near the brink on occasions.
Yeah, that was a spoof to try and... people had known I went off the market for a while because I was actually very ill. I had 3 heart attacks in one day and so on. And the chance of survival was, almost nil because I was up in the snow, actually. I think probably the snow was the one thing that saved me because I was, I had this heart attack when I was driving a car. I was with my sister, and luckily I pulled over to sort of see where we're trying to find the doctor. I didn't feel very well. I was driving, by the way, which was awful too. But anyway, I pulled over. And I then had this heart attack in the car. And my sister sort of opened the window and leant out and said, shouted, help. And this lady was right there. And she kind of took the message and they rang the doctor. And the doctor, who was expecting me, we were very near, but we couldn't find him because we'd been driving in a blizzard. And anyway, so we got this doctor who came out. I mean, by this stage, I was sort of foaming in the mouth down by the pedals of the car, and fallen down. And
wow!
And they pulled me out, and he resuscitated me somehow. But I went into a coma, and then I vomited into my lungs, which sounds scarce. I'm sorry to tell you that, but anyway, it caused septicemia, and then I had double pneumonia, and I was basically finished. And they didn't know whether I would survive, and they thought, actually, how long has this guy been dead for? Because if it's more than 5 minutes, he'll be brain dead. So shall we bring him back? Anyway, I remained in a coma for 9 days, and then I blew up like a balloon because septicemia makes you sort of jaundiced and inflate your body. So my poor kids who I was on holiday with had to sort of wait and listen every day to see if I was going to survive. Anyway, or whether indeed if I did survive, I came out of my coma, was I brain dead or was I paraplegic or was I completely brain dead? Mm-hmm. But I think I've survived. I'm still here. So
you know what? It's a pleasure to have you on as well,
You've
Jim.
not just survived, you've done so much in your life. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Jim's book, his autobiography, Life in Black and White, which recounts all those adventures that you've heard on Five Live and many more as well. That's Jim Lee joining us on the programme.